Hi, everybody. It's Miss Amber, and I'm here for another English 11B live lesson. Today, we are going over the last tutorial in Unit 1 for English 11B, and it's called American Drama. So I'll dive right in. There's a little bit to go over today. So let's just get started. Okay, we start with slide number 5, as usual, drama in American literature. I want to point out that by drama here, we don't mean dramatic in the sense that like things are exaggerated or that there's a lot of interaction between characters that are scandalous or anything like that. It is not drama the way that you would consider it today. Drama as a technical term refers to anything that can be performed on the stage. So this is basically a background of plays, dramatic plays in America. Now, this slide starts off by telling us that it arrived in America in the early 18th century. So that will be the early 1700s. They give you the name of two of the earliest known theater directors, which were Lewis and William Hallam. And that their drama troupe first performed William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice in Williamsburg, Virginia. So then they give you a little more information down here at the bottom. Lewis Hallam constructed the first theater in America in New York City. Now, they give you the actual background, not just of who brought drama to America, but what it looked like in earlier years. So they talk about how American theater lacked its own identity. So basically what they're saying here is people who were participating in American drama at the time were just performing plays from Europe, specifically Shakespeare's because his were so famous, but there were others. It took time before America had its own musicals, burlesques, minstrel shows, and circus performances, all of those kinds of things. It says here towards the end of the 19th century, that's the end of the 1800s, so it's like almost 100 years after it started, people started doing drama. American literature entered the realist period, and American theater took its own identity. So a lot of the plays were based on being jump-started by the realist period. Just as a reminder, the realist period followed right after the romantic period. So the romantic period was basically a point in time where there was a focus on individual people and their thoughts and feelings, and nature inspiring people to have thoughts and feelings. A lot of poems and pieces of art were of places in nature that were deemed to be beautiful, and people would write about or try to capture their personal feelings on it. Right after this was the realist period, where people came in and said, hey, we want to read and write more about the things that people actually experience in real life at this time. Having all this fantasy stuff doesn't actually help us understand what's going on and what real people are going through. We will want to see ourselves in this writing. So then we get the name of David Belasco, who is an important independent producer. He advocated realist principles in his plays. So he wanted to show more of everyday people in his plays. It says Belasco used electric lighting in his theater productions and attempted to appeal to the audience's hearts. So then at the bottom, we get groups, information about groups and some important dramas that happened in the 20th century, that's the 1900s. So in 1910, the Drama League of America was established in Chicago. And the point of the group was to push theater and make it more popular. In 1926, the Church and Drama Association tried to convey messages about being social and moral, and use drama and plays as an educational tool. Last paragraph is where we have a list of important dramas that came out, and they give you the names and the years that these came out. I would put all of these in your notes because there may be a question on the mastery test. Which one of these was a famous drama in the 20th century or something like that? Now, moving on, they give you a bunch of drama terms that you're going to need to understand while you're going through this section. I would encourage you to write this down too. That way, if you forget what something is, you'll be able to go back to this list. They give you the definition of a script, the text of a play or movie that the director and actors follow. There's an act, that's one of the main sections of a play, which is made up of several scenes. A scene itself is a smaller division of an act. So they tell you that a scene is part of an act, and an act is is a main section of a play. So the scene consists of all of the actions and conversations that happen in one setting. So you have to remember, on a stage, you can only have one setting at a time. You can't have two locations on one stage with things happening at the same time, or else the audience wouldn't be able to keep up. Normally what happens in a scene is that they'll put up props to show you where a person is or where people are. They'll try to get as many conversations and things out in that area as they can. And then they'll lower the lights, or there will be an intermission sometimes, and they'll move the props around to show that the rest or the next scene is happening in a different location. So the conversations that happen all in one place before they move the props around and stuff, that is a scene. If you're moving from one place or time to another in a play, those are two different scenes. The next is lines. Lines are just the words that are intended to be spoken out loud during a play. We all kind of know what lines are, but this is just important. They give you an example here of an excerpt from a play, the actual script. And it's the part after the colon, "Why don't you come with me?" That is the actual line. Stage directions are usually in italics. That's the slanted lettering that we have here. And they are usually instructions on how to deliver the line, or what the character is supposed to be doing while they're delivering the line. So in this case, it would be excitedly to her brother. So they want the actor to know this line should be said like you're excited. A dialogue is just a conversation between two or more people. Just to make this connection to other things that we've talked about, the prefix di, di, means two. So dialogues is a conversation between two or more people. There might be a reference to this later, but a monologue, mono, is a prefix that means one. So it's when one person is just talking to the audience. A dialogue is between two or more people. And then dramatic irony is a type of irony where you, who's watching the play and has seen all the scenes, you know where everything is and what everyone is about to do, because you get the thoughts and feelings of the characters on stage. But the characters in the story don't know what's happening. It's the best example of dramatic irony is when you're watching a horror film and you know what's going on and you're screaming at the characters on screen, "Oh, don't do this, don't go there. He's right there. He's literally going to sneak up on you." The characters in the movie don't know what's going on, but you've seen everything because you're watching it from the outside. Plays are the same way. You're in the audience in a chair watching what's happening, but the characters that don't show up in the same scene together, they don't know what's happening with everyone else. Okay, so stage direction. Basically, they're just giving you information on how stage direction became important. Ezra Pound, they give you a quote here, says, "The medium of a drama is not words, but the person's moving about on a stage using words." So what he's saying is that your actions have to match the lines that you're delivering. So the stage directions that you see in the paragraph, the italics that we just went over in the last slide, gives actors directions so that they can actually say the lines the way they're supposed to be. When actors perform a play, they do not read these instructions out loud. Instead, the actors act out the playwright's directions for the audience. However, when reading a play, the reader must use the stage directions written into the script in italics to imagine how lines are meant to be delivered and how the characters are moving about the stage. So basically, because plays are things that you have to actually look over and memorize, there's instructions built in so that people have an idea of what it's supposed to look like on stage. we kind of see bits and pieces of this whenever we watch behind the scenes for something that someone is doing. When they film a movie, you have a director that will come out and say, oh, well, when I wrote this, I imagined this scene playing out like this. So could you say this in a different way or do this in a different way? But for written scripts, those directions are actually just baked in instead of a discussion out loud. Okay, now on this slide, they give you different parts of a stage. What I can tell you with 100% certainty is that one of the questions on the mastery test for this lesson gives you a stage and asks you to put these labels where they are supposed to be. It's not this exact same picture, but it is a picture. So it's important for you to draw a diagram in your notes, make sure that you sketch it out so that you know exactly what these things are. Now, what will help you understand how they've labeled things is that the stage and the stage directions are labeled based on what it looks like to the person who's coming out to perform. So if you're out in the audience, this being stage left isn't going to make sense to you because you're looking forward from this direction. So what's important to remember is if you're at the back of the stage, that's the directions that they use to label these things. So stage left is left from the direction of you coming out on stage. Stage right is the direction from you coming out on stage. Downstage is towards the audience. And upstage is the back of the stage. If you don't think you're going to remember this, make sure to put it in your notes. I wrote it down in my notes when I was reviewing this lesson. So here on slide 10, they give you an example of what a script is actually like. This isn't exactly the same as just like a reading selection. They just give you information on what it's like to read a script. So this is the example. They have the description here of what the scene is supposed to look like. So the description tells you where everyone should be standing and who's involved in this scene. Then they give us the actual dialogue. The names of the characters are usually in capital letters so that they can't be mistaken for lines that you're supposed to say out loud. They do that on purpose to stop there from being issues with people reading. And it works pretty well. Usually if it's in capital letters, you know, for sure, it's not something you're supposed to read out loud. People don't talk out loud in capital letters. They give you examples of the instructions that are in parentheses. They're italicized. They come up in the middle and at the end of dialogue. Sometimes you'll see them at the beginning. And then they explain this down at the bottom. As the play begins, the stage directions in italics set the scene by explicitly describing the location and actions of each character. If the happy journey to Trenton and Camden, that's the name of this work, were being performed, the audience would not know what the words in italics say. So instead, they would just glean the information through the performer's action. So everyone would be positioned based on this description. This isn't something that you read out loud to the audience, is what they're saying. However, if the play is just being read as literature, the reader will use the stage directions to mentally create the scene. So when you go through and read this, it's important to actually imagine where these people would be and what it would look like. Okay, so now we have dialogue and monologue. So the dialogue and monologue, I kind of explained it earlier, so I'm just going to go over it again. Dialogue is a conversation that happens between two or more characters. A monologue is when just one character is on the stage and speaking. Mono means one, di means two. And then we get dramatic irony. Again, we talked about this, but just to go over it, it is the difference between what a character knows and believes and what the audience knows to be true based on what they've seen. Dramatic irony occurs in drama because the audience sees scenes that a particular character may not. For example, in William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the audience knows that it wasn't poison that Juliet drank, but Romeo is led to believe that she's killed herself. So when you think about it like that, when you think about dramatic irony that way, it gives you a better idea of um, uh, exactly how that sort of tension builds. So the sort of thing that you feel when you're watching a horror film and talking to the characters, that's exactly how audiences felt when they were watching people perform Romeo and Juliet. No, Romeo, don't drink real poison. Juliet's not actually dead, you idiot. You know, like that kind of thing. And that's how dramatic irony became very popular. So here on slide 13, we get into parody. So parody is when you have a work that imitates a popular style, author, or genre by mimicking certain features of the original, including diction, that's word choice, style, and form, while exaggerating and changing other elements for comedic effect. So pretty much, we see parodies in shows all the time. Shows like Family Guy, Rick and Morty, they'll show you things that are familiar to you, scenes from movies or books and things like that, and basically exaggerate stuff about them to make a joke out of it. That is what parody is. Now, there were books that were parody back in the day before film, before um, different types of novels came out. Parody happened in plays a whole lot. So pretty much you would have people who would write their own version of a story and change up some things to show, isn't this ridiculous? This story, I don't agree with what's in it. Here's the reason why. Or if they had a question to ask, like, hey, this is super dramatic and serious, but has anybody asked why this is happening? They would write a whole play or a whole story questioning, but why did someone even write this? And they would parody it to make their jokes to an audience who maybe also didn't like it or also had the same questions. Sometimes parodies are just for jokes. They see the opportunity for a joke, they think it's funny, so they just take it because they know that it'll probably also be popular if it's based on a popular work. But sometimes it would be a tribute to an author. So like I wrote my own version of this thing that an author that I like wrote. And sometimes it would be criticism to make fun of something or point out that something in a work that people like a lot doesn't make sense. Then they give you an example. John Bennett's What Troubled Poe's Raven is a poem that parodies Edgar Allan Poe's famous work, The Raven. For those of you who may have heard of The Raven before, I mean, you should have, but it is specifically the work, The Nevermore, Once Upon a Midnight Dreary, While I Pondered, Weak and Weary. It's a very famous poem with the raven that says nevermore a bunch of times. So this author, John Bennett, made a parody of it. And they give you two excerpts from each one so you can compare them. So I'm not going to read these out loud. But yes, I'll read a couple lines from them. So just to get the scheme of how this sounds, we'll read these first four lines. You know what? We'll read down to nevermore. That's what we'll do. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling. Straight I wheeled, a cushioned seat in front of bird and busting door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy onto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. So John Bennett parodied this and used a similar structure. So it'll sound similar to the raven. And too angry to be civil, Raven, Poe would cry, or devil, tell me why you will persist in haunting death's Plutonian shore. Then I will croak the raven gladly. I will tell you why so sadly, I so mournfully and madly haunt you, taunt you over and over. Why eternally I haunt you, daunt you, taunt you over and over. Only this and nothing more. So it's not exactly the same, but you can see where the inspiration is. The way that the lines are stuttered sounds similar. And here they give you a little breakdown. The speakers in both of these poems of the previous screen have a similar purpose. Poe's speaker is recounting a tale and addressing the raven. That was the point of the original poem. And Bennett is addressing Poe himself and trying to figure out or surmise the raven's motives. Bennett imitates the exact structure that Poe uses in The Raven, down to the rhythm and internal rhyme. Bennett also repeats certain words that Poe uses, such as o'er, which is like a run together version of over. Bennett employs these characteristics in a parody of imitating a well-known poem as a way to mock the serious and eerie mood that Poe creates. And you can kind of tell he goes out of his way to describe haunting death's Plutonian shore. It's a valid description based on the time, but it's just kind of a ridiculous set of words to have like in a poem, you know? So he was sort of making fun of how serious it is. So then we go into understatement. So understatement is a technique that you use to create emphasis by saying less than what's true. So pretty much, they use the example here while it's pouring. It's literally pouring rain. The rain looks like mist on this umbrella. And it says saying that it's raining a little bit in the midst of a downpour would be an understatement. So you're bringing attention to it by characterizing it as less than what it actually is. And then there are some other examples here. It isn't very serious. I have this tiny tumor in my brain. Obviously, if you have a tumor in your brain, that's not great. That's not great at all. Like literally, not at all. But to say it isn't very serious, you know, the person who's saying it knows that it is actually very serious, but they're downplaying it for the moment and kind of bringing more attention to it because of that. And then they give you litotes here. A particular kind of understatement is litotes, which is a understatement that expresses the affirmative by saying the negative of the contrary. So that sounds really confusing, but we're gonna get like into an example of it. So you're expressing the affirmative by saying the negative of the contrary. So like if you were to say, no, it's not that bad, what you're actually saying is that it's good by negating a negative. So like if you're in a very bright room and you're covering your eyes and someone says, oh, is it hard to see in there? And you say, no, it's not dark in here at all. They didn't even ask about that. They asked about if it was hard to see because it was bright. But by saying, no, it's not that dark, you're letting them know that the opposite is what's happening. It's bright. Those kind of words or phrases have a term, and it's litotes. So they give you an example here. Not seldom from the uproar I retired into a silent bay. So seldom means rarely or not often. So if you say not seldom, what you're saying is not often. So he's suggesting that what he does very often is retire or leave to a silent bay. So a bay is literally like an outside water source. So he's saying that very often he'll go off to be by himself, like by the bay. Oh, let's see. Okay. So when we get to the reading selection, finally, we get some information about George S. Kaufman. He's an author who was a part of the Alenkine Round Table, which was a lunch group. So a lunch group is basically like a term for artists or writers. They get together often to write and brainstorm during these lunch meetings. They give you a little more information about his life, where he grew up, some places where he worked. And then in the second paragraph, they give you information about who he collaborated with, including John Steinbeck, the Marx Brothers, for whom he wrote many skits. So he wrote a lot of plays. And Ira Gershwin, that a person that he worked with and won a Pulitzer Prize with. Kaufman wrote predominantly humorous plays using understatement and satire to emphasize the comedic tone of his work. Many of his plays were later transformed into movie scripts. So the advice that they give you for figuring things out while you are reading is to act them out. Try to imagine what it would be like to be on the stage. Imagine who is talking to who and what they're saying. The same way that you try to imagine things when you're reading a novel, they want you to do the same thing here. They suggest acting things out with some friends, but in this COVID climate, it's not super likely. So just try to imagine what it would be like to act it out, and it might help you understand what's happening in the story a little more. Now, as we know, I don't read through excerpts, but I will go over some of the analysis information just to make sure that you understand everything that you need to know before you go and read the excerpt. Sometimes it helps to read about what you're looking for and what you're reading before you actually read it, especially if you're not sure if you're going to understand it or not. So the long and short story of The Still Alarm is that it's a play about a building that is on fire and how people react to it. There is basically a building that's on fire, and instead of evacuating, Bob and Ed, two characters, stay in their room, even when they sense that the fire is reaching them. It is not just them, it's everyone. Everyone in The Still Alarm is calm, unconcerned. They are unbothered by the fact that this building is on fire, even though it's serious. So pretty much everyone was directed in this play to deliver their lines as if they just got a posh lunch invitation. So everyone is supposed to react underwhelmingly to the fire. That's pretty much the gimmick. This was considered humorous. Things are on fire and people are like, oh, really? I didn't know that. Well, I still have to, go in for my 9 o'clock exercise. And people are like, well, the building's on fire. And they're like, yeah, I know. Thanks for telling me. So it's supposed to be humorous because they are not reacting to the fire the way normal people would. Specifically, the point of this joke is to make fun of British society. The author was specifically trying to write about British society being proper, too proper, so proper that everyone has to be cool and relaxed and polite even while the building is on fire. So that's basically what the joke is supposed to be. It says, instead of reacting to the fire, the characters fixate on what is proper. For example, instead of being concerned about getting out of a burning building safely, Bob worries that no one will know where his mail should be sent. The characters also never raise their voices because such behavior will be considered improper. So then we get to the stage directions that I was mentioning earlier. Kaufman included a vital note at the beginning of the play, which states, no actor ever raises his voice. Every line must be read as though it were an invitation to a cup of tea. If this direction is disregarded, then the play has no point at all. One of the objectives of The Still Alarm was to parody British society, and Kaufman wants the understated behavior of the actors to mock or make fun of how the British act, which is like really mean, but that was considered humor at the time. One thing that you'll notice while you're reading this is that there are not a lot of stage directions in The Still Alarm, other than just saying that everyone has to keep their voice low and respond like they're being invited to tea. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of stage directions. For example, when Bob realizes that the floor is hot, the stage directions simply say, feels something on the sole of his foot, inspects it. The actor playing Bob is not told how to react, which allows him to interpret the manner in which his character will carry out the reaction. So instead of making it hard for people to figure out what to do, there's a few general directions for the actors to follow, but they're not very specific. And the actors have a little more free reign for how they want to act out the scene. On this slide 26, you get a dramatic reading of The Still Alarm. So they pretty much give you a section of the play that's read with some images so that you can sort of hear how it's going on. And I think the rest of these, oh, yes. Okay, so the last section here is focus on language. Many groups of English words are derived from Greek and Latin roots. So they're giving you prefixes, roots, and suffixes and their meanings. So the beginnings of words, the middles of words, and the ends of words. And they tell you what the origin is and what the meaning is. Now, you don't have to copy down this whole table, but I would encourage you to write down at least the prefix and question from this first column and the meaning. If you care enough, you can write down the origin, because Greek and Latin origins are different, and you might notice a pattern in how some of these sections affect words that you know. So for example, we have rupt here from Latin. You might recognize this section from the word bankrupt, and it means to break. So if you are bankrupt, then the bank has broken. There's no more money in it. So that's where the idea of the word bankrupt comes from. You have no money. And just other things like that. These are just pieces of words that are supposed to help you recognize other words. If you know what the parts of words mean, even if you see a word that you don't understand, you can make a better guess at what the word might mean. Studying things like this in English classes is basically how people get the ability to guess at what words would mean, even if they don't actually know them. But that's about it. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. This wasn't a super long lesson. It was just about, drama in the US and how that developed. If you have any questions about the excerpt, or if you have any quick questions about the lesson, you can send us an email at english@atsedu.net. If you are having trouble with the reading selection, or you need help with the mastery test for this, please contact your mentor or advocate so that you can schedule a tutoring session with either me or Ms. Vahovic. And lastly, if you need a couple pointers on these notes, you can always take a look at the English concept summaries. If you are a Step Up student, you do not have the English resource course assigned, but it's an open link that anyone can access. You can send an email to the English department email to get that link, or you can talk to your mentor or advocate and they can link you to the English summaries so that you can use them in case you need a little help bumping up your notes or figuring out which examples to put in your notes. But other than that, this is Miss Amber signing off, and good luck with your English class.